Hello and welcome back to season 3 of Meet the Experts. Today I am meeting with the lovely Adam Carroll, who happened to play a game of Monopoly with his family using real dosh and did a TED talk on it that went kind of viral. So I'm really excited today to bring you the fabulous Adam Carroll. Thank you for joining us, Adam.
Amanda, thank you for having me from one AC to another AC.
Indeed.
Good to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background in financial services, Adam, and what led you to come up with the idea of pulling all this cash out of the bank for a family game of Monopoly?
Well, I've heard this before that some of us we make our mess our message, and I graduated from university as a debt statistic. I had $30,000 in student loans. I had $8,000 in credit card debt, and I realized when I got out of college that I was a broke professional. I had been a rich college kid, and I quickly became a broke professional. And it prompted me to begin reading books on personal finance, Amanda, and really digging deep into behavior and why do people do what they do, and what were the things that sort of influenced me along the way. And from that, I realized that in getting out of debt, which I did in about 2 years' time, it was relatively simple. It wasn't always easy, and I thought, why aren't we teaching this? We should be teaching this to people, especially high school and college students. And so that led me down a path of training for about, I don't know, 10 years or so on the college level. And then lo and behold, I have kids. I start wanting to teach them about money. And I was watching these college students make really horrendous financial decisions with money that didn't seem real. And then I started seeing it sort of play out with my children when we played games like Monopoly. And so at one point I questioned, what if the money were real? Could I bring, real dollar bills to the table and see if my kids play differently? And that's ultimately what got us there.
How did your wife go with you pulling that much money out of the bank?
You'll appreciate this, Amanda. She said, this does not go on social media. Do not take pictures. Do not post. I don't want anyone to know that this money is
No
here.
geo tagging our address in this one.
That's right. None of the above. So
So what
the
did you
kids were,
notice in the way the kids played the game previously when it was just for fun versus
mm,
using real money? What changed in the dynamic?
well, we've been playing board games like Monopoly for a very long time. And they were, I think when we played this game, they were 6, 8, and 10. And my kids, they love to play the games, but what they really love is the rolling of the dice and the moving of the pieces. And while we were playing Monopoly, what I was realizing was they didn't really pay much attention to the dollars, the Monopoly money that was sitting around the table. And in fact, at one point, they were buying each other out of jail. And I was like, guys, this isn't even a thing. What are you doing? You're you're paying
I
two hundred
love how
dollars
every
to get
family
your
makes their entirely own set of rules to Monopoly. It's fabulous.
oh, and they were too. And so it was at that point in time where I was questioning the money isn't real anymore. It's just slips of paper. They're rumpled, they're torn, they're tattered. And then I started equating that with how we're spending money today in society, which is using Apple Pay and Google Pay and Venmo. And, we tap our watch to a reader and we walk away without even thinking twice. And so in my mind, it was this level of financial abstraction where money is no longer real. It's just an abstract idea and it changes the way that we play. So my daughter's not a very strategic player when she played Monopoly back in the day. She loved chance and community chess cards, and that's it. My middle son, very strategic, bought all the railroads, all the utilities, and then he would buy Boardwalk and Park Place and try and bankrupt everyone that way. And then my younger son bought everything that he landed on with no exception. And he was almost always out of cash at some level. But that was the way they played. And then I had this hypothesis that they would probably play differently if there was $10,000 in glue on the table.
So what changed for them? Did their strategies change? Did touching the real money make a difference to them? I mean, I'm realizing they're also quite young, and money at those ages still isn't real. I mean, they're not earning, it's just something you parents
Yeah.
provide for everything. So it'd be interesting to
Yes.
know how much it actually changed for them.
Well, and I would say the biggest difference that we noticed right off the bat was my youngest son, who, used to buy everything with no exception. He started asking, how much is rent on that space? How much is rent on that space? How much is rent on that space? And then he would recount his money over and over and over again to make sure that he could stay in the game if he landed on one of the spaces. And so he started buying some properties. And then I think that influenced my daughter, who said, well, now I'm not making any money and the boys are making money. So she started buying properties. But my middle son, he bought all the railroads, he bought all the utilities, but instead of buying Boardwalk and Park Place, he bought Oriental and Baltic Avenue, which are two of the cheapest spaces on the board. And at
Okay,
one
so
point, Amanda,
I'm used to the English and the Australian versions. Are we talking along the
yeah,
first run or the second run of the Monopoly board here?
the first run, yeah,
First
right
run,
after you
okay.
pass go. Yep. And I had to memorize the English version. I can't remember what they are today, but when I did my TED talk, which I did in London, I had to make it relevant. So I was memorizing
Is it
the
Old
UK
Kent
version of the
Road?
board.
And yeah, it's coming coming back to me.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. So, but my middle son, he bought the less expensive properties, and I said, buddy, I'm just curious, why did you buy those spaces? And he said, just plain as day, well, Dad, they're just more affordable properties. And at that point, I cried a solitary tear of pride. I was just so excited.
My work
He was
here is
getting it.
done.
That's right.
How do you think, since I suppose turning this, what was just, I suppose, to be a family fun game and a lesson for your kids,
Yeah.
into a TED talk that's gone viral and the lessons on your own children and others, how do you think this has all played out, I suppose, from just a game to real life in your own situation and what you've recognized since doing this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right after we played the game, we debriefed with everyone, my wife and I included. And I said, what did you notice? And she said, they're far more conservative with their money than they are with our money. And this is true for parents everywhere, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
your kids want to spend your money, they don't want to spend their own. Excuse me. And so, what we did, and this is really what changed for us, and what I would encourage your listeners to consider, is we started forcing, I say forcing, we started putting money in our children's hands. And it was basically allowance after they had done chores, and the chores had to be done in order to get the allowance. But as a matter of the allowance being had, we also then forced some of the decision making down to them at the financial level. So we said, this is now your money, which means if you want to go get ice cream or you want to get donuts on the weekend, you want to go to a ball game when you're a teenager, go to the movies, that is your money. You must understand there is a limited supply of that, and it's now up to you to keep track of it and control it. And an amazing thing happened, Amanda. They got really confident about their money making, or I'm sorry, their money deciding skills, and they would make mistakes here and there, but we were there to correct them and say, "Do you think you should have bought a 5 pound bag of Starburst with the money that you just, the money you just used?" And they would go, "No, maybe not." But I was wanting them to make decisions and mistakes at the $5 level and the 15 and $20 level, because I was seeing college students make $1,000 mistakes at 18 because their parents had never given them money, but they'd never made money decisions before.
Fascinating how when it's yours, it's a whole other story. In, I
Hmm.
suppose, IRL, in real life now, when you're talking about this group that grow up, they've never had a pay packet that's cash. They didn't get to bring the cash
Yeah.
physically home and go, right, I've got to put $20 for fuel and $20 for my rent, and, put it in the envelopes to work out what they need for everything. So there's this
Yeah.
missing piece, I suppose. And look, we can do sub accounts today to,
Hmm.
put bits and pieces away for different things. Do you think it's made a big difference, the so-called cashless society that we live in, and people's views on money?
I do. In fact, there are a number of studies that have been done that say that we spend on average 17 to 20% more when we're using plastic or we're not handing over cash. And it's rooted in psychology that, if I don't know about you, but if I have a 50 or a $100 bill, it's hard for me to break that bill. I tend to hold on to those. I want to keep them. They're wrapped around all the other bills, They make me feel abundant. And
Yeah.
so there's a part of our brain that fires when we hand over a big bill, and it's a pain sensor that goes off in our brain. And the pain is I no longer have that big bill. And yet I know a lot of people, myself included, could go onto Amazon and hit one click ship for $47 and not think twice about it,
Mhm.
because we are actually in positive expectancy for that thing to arrive at our doorstep the next day. So it's a very different, it's a different emotional, psychological experience when we're using real cash versus using ones and zeros for the most part.
Yeah. The old bank in the wall that suddenly you don't realize how the money gets into the bank in the wall. All of a sudden, yeah, it's
Indeed.
just a little bit different. What was the degree you left college with first as a broke professional?
That's
What
funny.
had you been studying?
I was a broadcasting major. I thought I
Okay.
was going to be a reporter or an anchor person. I wanted to be in front of the camera. As it turns out, I am almost every day on Zoom.
Too funny.
A byproduct of 2020 and beyond. Um, but I left with broadcasting. I had no financial acumen whatsoever, no accounting training, no finance training. And then I just had this like insane curiosity around money and around business and being an entrepreneur. And I went on a 5-year journey of just learning everything I could, that then turned into the next, 15 years later, still pursuing it and still learning more and realizing that the mastery of money is what I'm after, which is just this endless lifelong pursuit, that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't really know that much. And there's
How true
always
is
more to
that?
learn. Yeah.
I find that most people who are financial professionals, especially those probably in the 30 plus category, not many of them left college or high school or university thinking, I want to become a financial advisor or I want to become, a stockbroker or something like that.
Yes.
It's more of an accidental career like yourself where you've gone down one path and it's almost a personal interest. It's like, well, I never got taught any financial literacy at
Yeah.
school. My parents aren't super well off. I don't know much. They didn't teach me anything. I think I'll do
Yeah.
it myself. Like you start reading the personal finance books, you go down that path to personally educate. Do you think there should be some level of responsibility from governments, from corporate, to start teaching a level of financial literacy at schools?
I do. And I was actually a huge proponent of this for a number of years. It felt like I was sort of tilting at windmills in the US because there's only about 18 states that mandate financial literacy as a graduation requirement for high school. And the colleges are woefully underprepared to teach it, although some are stepping up and trying to do more in that vein. But I really honestly, Amanda, I think it's like a three-legged stool. You got to teach it at home, you got to learn it at school, and at the workplace also needs to be sharing it. And there's so much around money today that's emotional. It's got emotional baggage to it, that I think people are sort of resistant to talk about it or want to face it. And yet, for professionals who can do this really well, it can make a world of difference for someone who grew up in a household where money was taboo and they fought about money all the time. And they're raised like, I really don't know what I'm doing. So they make all these, you know, unfortunate decisions as they're growing up. I just think we could turn the tide for a lot of people if financial education were more widespread in all those areas.
Absolutely. So, after your broadcasting degree and you did all this other learning, do you now
Yeah,
have financial degrees as well?
I do. I do. For me, I won't say like I have so many degrees. You could call me a thermometer or anything, but
Alphabet
there are a
soup.
lot of certifications and, yeah, the alphabet soup behind my name. I've tried to get as many classes under my belt as possible, and it ends up and you know this world, like you get CEUs, the continuing education units, and some of those I think, wow, this is really cool. I want to go down this path. And some of them I think, when will this class be over? I just want to check the box and move on. But every one of them sort of adds to the foundational level of money knowledge, of financial knowledge that I can then impart to people that I'm coaching or helping with their investments.
So, do you focus more on younger people to start that financial literacy and education journey early, or everybody who wants to learn is someone you're interested in helping?
I would say probably the latter. Anyone that's interested, I'm all about helping them, get on the right path. I do still really enjoy, going and speaking to young people, high schools and colleges, though it's a little bit different for me. I kind of ventured away from that world because when I started, I was in my 20s. And they would look at me like, oh, he's like my cousin or my older brother. And then, Amanda, to be honest, I was at a school and someone said, man, I wish my dad were like you. And I was like, oh, I can't, I
Suddenly, I'm the
can't,
old guy.
I can't do these anymore. um, so now I can get up in front of a group and, I have wrinkles around my eyes and I have no hair. And people are like, oh, he's got some years under his belt and he's wise.
Very cute. So the idea of the broadcasting, obviously you're now, podcasting and educating. So it probably wasn't a wasted degree anyway, because you've got the background. How has going down that, I suppose, personal discovery path personally played out for you, both on I guess I'm being nosy about, has it changed your personal financial situation, and also career path as well? How has that evolved over time from what you thought?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for asking it. For me, it's definitely changed our financial picture in a massive way. I mean, when I got out of school, I was a debt statistic. I joke about it now, but I used to say when my wife and I got married, we were so broke we couldn't afford to pay attention. And the goal was to blast away the debt and to create a life that was different than what our parents lived. And we did it. We did it in short order. And so those were the first 2 years of our marriage. And then from then on, it was really about how do we develop and grow and create, what our definition of wealth was. And for what it's worth, for me, I look at wealth as a measure of time. And the idea that if your current income stopped tomorrow, how long could you live your lifestyle? That's wealth. And it's dependent on, the big shiny pile of money you have set aside, but also passive income and the minimization of expenses on a monthly basis, which we've done a good job at. So it's definitely changed our finances. I would not have gotten to a multimillionaire status had I gone down the path of being a broadcaster. I don't think it would have taken me a very long time to get there. And then from a career perspective, I realized at one point I love the game of entrepreneurship. I love the idea of creating content. And I realized at one point that I'm a mediapreneur. I really like building products, and whether it's courses or documentaries or speaking engagements, audios, videos, and then turning around and figuring out how to market and sell those to people in mass. And that, one of those projects led me to doing a documentary on student loan debt that was just kind of like a crowning achievement for me to even get that done. And then we turned around and we sold it to CNBC and it aired right after Shark Tank. So it was kind of this surreal moment of I had this idea, we crowdfunded it, we created it, and 2 years later, we're watching it on CNBC.
Wow. So, can I be super nosy as well? For the people sitting there asking, going, "Oh, good for you! You've gone down this path. You've done a TED talk. You've had a show. I'm right now drowning in debt, whether it's student debt, credit card
Yeah.
debt, personal household debt. What are some things or quick takeouts you can give me today that I can start implementing to turn things around? Because 2 years sounds like a great idea to be able to, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's not going to take the rest of my life. What can I do today to
Yeah.
start on that journey?
Yeah. I would love, so the way I always start talking about this particular topic is to give three sort of high level mindset ideas for people to walk away with. And then, once I give those, it's a little bit easier to say technically, here's what you would do. So the first piece of advice I would give someone that's in debt is our lives are perfectly engineered for the results we're currently getting. So if you are in debt, your life is engineered for you to be in debt because either you're spending more than you make, maybe there was a job loss at some point, but you had not set enough aside to weather the financial downturn or a storm. And so, understand that our lives are perfectly engineered for the results we're currently getting. That's number one. Number two, and this is what my wife and I lived by, was that if you do for 2 years what most people won't do, you can do for the rest of your life what most people can't do. And most people for 2 years, they won't save, they won't eat at home and not dine out. They won't drink $3 bottles of wine instead of $12 bottles of wine, which we did for
Yeah, I
a
wouldn't
long
do that.
time.
I couldn't handle a
Yeah,
headache.
it was rough. We would celebrate when we paid off debts, though. We'd go buy a $12 or $15 bottle of wine. We'd be like, wow, we're really living.
Beautiful.
Um, and then, the last mindset shift is that building wealth, growing your wealth and getting out of debt is very, very simple. You just have to create a spread between what you make and what you spend for as long as humanly possible. And what that means is you have to play two things really well. You have to play really good offense where you're making money, and you have to play really good defense where you're minimizing or being very intentional about your expenses. And so, for the folks that do find themselves in debt, one of the very first things that I think you have to do is realize that if you're using a credit card or Venmo or Apple Pay or something like that to pay your bills, go back to cash for a period of time because you're likely overspending and not realizing it. And that going back to cash, if even for 3 or 6 months, is going to retrain your brain and the feeling of like, oh, this is loss. I only have so much of this. Whereas when people are using credit cards or home equity lines or personal lines of credit, we're literally borrowing from tomorrow's ability to buy.
You're
And
robbing future
I
Adam or
always,
future Amanda or our future
that's
selves.
exact.
Yeah.
Yes. And I always said, I want future us to love current us. I want my future self to be like, that dude was a stud. He set us up.
He's a rock star. So, for someone who's brave
Yeah.
enough to sit down right now, look at their finances, work out what's going out, just for 5 seconds, don't worry about what's coming in. Just sit down and go,
Yep.
right, it costs me $769.20 a week, a fortnight, 1412, whatever it may be, whatever your
Yep.
income period is going out. Now, when I turn around and realize either my income or pension or whatever I'm getting isn't enough, and you go,
Yep.
oh shit, what can we do straight away to start? Because obviously we don't have that gap between our income and expenses that you're saying is
Yeah.
is the ideal situation we're looking for. What can we do to start pulling those expenses back? I mean, obviously everyone sort of goes, yeah, discretionary spend. So do you have any top tips for
Right.
how we pull it back?
The easiest way to do that right off the bat is to begin looking at, what are in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have basic needs on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's food, shelter, security. We move up from there. And at some level, when people are overspending what they're making, they're probably farther up the hierarchy of needs. They're into things like, well, I want to buy these clothes because my friends all wear these clothes, or I want to go to these restaurants because I'm hearing about it all the time. And it's a really sometimes a challenge. It's a challenging conversation to be sure to have with if you have a partner to say, hey, we can't afford this life that we're living right now. And candidly, Amanda, I've had family members that I've sat down with and said, you can't afford the life you're living. You're living like you're still earning a full living, and you've retired 3 years ago, already dipped into some of your retirement, and you shouldn't even be at that point yet. Like, you can't afford this lifestyle. It's a hard conversation to have, but I would say that for folks that are in that scenario, if you can find someone that can do that in the most compassionate way possible, and then help coach and guide you into a lifestyle that you can afford, you can live within, that's the key. I mean, if someone's saying, I don't know how to do this, find someone that can help you do it. Find a coach, find a mentor, find an advisor who has a heart for helping people in that situation. Because you cannot borrow your way out of a spending problem, and people will try, but it just doesn't work.
Call that the
You have
champagne
to, you have to,
lifestyle on the beer budget.
that's exactly it. That's
So
exactly it.
when you said get someone to help you, pardon me, I'm so croaky today. Obviously, to sit down and look at where everything's going is the first thing. So if you've got that mapped out in front of you, do you think it's very hard to
Yeah.
sit there and go, look, I've got my Netflix and my Stan and my Binge and my KO, but I'm watching this show here and that show there. Whereas someone might come to you and go, look, one streaming service at a time. That's easier for someone to see than when you're in it. Or
Totally.
look, you are spending, on this level of clothing. Do you really need clothes for the next 12 months? Let's stop that for 12 months. Is it easier for someone
Yes,
who's not emotionally involved to help with that?
it
Or do you
is.
find people will get their hackles up and be defensive going, don't tell me what to do?
There will definitely be that from time to time. And I was actually, this is so timely. Yesterday, I was with a group of financial professionals at a credit union, a financial institution, and we were teaching them coaching philosophies. And in the coach level, a coach might say, "Are you open to an observation?" And someone who's in that situation would say, "Well, yeah, I guess." And the coach could say, "I noticed on your credit report, or I noticed on your bank statement that there's a lot of dining out charges. So just as a curiosity, do you have any sense of how much you're spending in convenience food, like in fast food or dining out? Do you have any sense of that?" "No, I really don't." And then say, "Well, how about you take a guess? I'll add it up and you just guess how much you might be spending on that." And here's what I think becomes possible when someone is doing that for you, Amanda, is they can hold up a mirror and say, "Hey, this is what you're saying you want, but your behavior says something else. So if you really want to live comfortably, but not be in debt, then you're going to have to probably make some changes here. Are you willing to do that?" And a great coach that can ask questions around, let's look out 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. What would have to happen in your life to make you feel secure, happy, fulfilled from a financial perspective? And if someone said, "I need to be out of debt, I'd like to have, 3 months of living in the bank," and you go, "Okay, cool. So what would it feel like if you had that? What would that feeling be like?" And that sometimes I find is what people are missing, is the leverage question of, if you had that, what would it feel like? And I ask this all the time of people, if you had no mortgage payment, what would that feel like? And people go, "Oh my gosh, it'd be
The
amazing. I can't
relief.
even imagine what it would feel like."
I remember an
Yeah.
old diet coach said something along the lines of, "Nothing tastes as good as being slim feels." I think that
Mm,
can, be applied to so many different situations. So,
yes.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a great question to ask yourself as well, because sometimes when someone's holding up that mirror, we don't always love what we're seeing reflected. So,
No.
that confrontation, how can we get past that? Like, you've said the coaching part, but I mean, obviously, when we're confronted with, oh my goodness, I have to make these changes to get that feeling I want, we can be so
Right.
resistant to change. Is
Yeah.
just focusing on that end enough to change our behavior, or is it being accountable to somebody? What is going to get us beyond ourselves
Mm.
to get to where we want to go?
Well, wouldn't it all surprise me if you have the book I'm about to mention on the bookshelf behind you? There's a book written by a guy named T. Harv Eker, and it's called Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. And in that book, there was a core piece that I use in most of my trainings, where he said, if you want to change the fruits, you must first change the roots. And what he meant by that was, if the tree of your life is producing apples and you really want oranges, you have to go back all the way to the roots and change the roots in order to get oranges on your tree. And so for people that find themselves in a situation where, "I know I need to change, but I really don't want to," how do we go back to the roots of what you learned growing up around money and just delve into that, talk about it, explore it, find out what did you hear growing up from your parents and society when you were, 0 to 9, because they say that our money personality is set by the age of 9 years of age. And so, case in point, there's a good friend of mine who has this logic statement, I guess you would call it, or a lens through which she sees the world. And she will say quite often, well, we'll never have a lot of money, so we might as well spend it now. Because we'll never have a lot of money, so we might as well spend it now. So when you
Stuck in a
think about
loop.
that, it's a perpetual loop of never having it. And when I asked her, hey, when you say that, what I hear is every time you get a little bit or a lot, you're going to spend it because you're guaranteed to never have a lot that way. And that seems to be the narrative that you're living under. And she was like, it's just what I heard growing up. We'll never have a lot, so we might as well spend it now. And I find that 9 times out of 10, somebody that's deep in debt and struggling to make ends meet, they have some negative connotation to money, some emotional attachment to money that's negative, that resulted from probably a conversation they had with or overheard their parents have when they were a kid. And it just perpetuated into life today. And that could be, my dad saying, well, the Carrolls are always going to be in debt. We're always going to have a credit card debt. We'll always have car loans. And if you believe that as the truth, you may make decisions that make that the truth, but it may not be your truth. It was their truth at the time. So we have to go back and like pull that tree out by its roots and replant. How do we want to be with money, and what's the relationship we want with it? Only then can we truly change the behavior, because again, the behavior is so tied to emotion.
Do you find that there's an intergenerational story? I suppose even if we're just going back in the past century, our grandparents or great grandparents, probably if you're Gen X, lived through the war, the silent generation. So they came
Yeah.
from this very frugal, save everything, recycle, fix, darn your stockings, put your buttons back on. These things have to
Yes.
last. To the baby
Yep.
boomers who had this bit more of the freedom and the sexual revolution coming up. So we're a little freer and had a slightly different philosophy, but were raised by parents who lived in this scarcity mindset, who then had
Yes.
the Gen Xers who hadn't lived through the hardships and privations, but they were still fairly
Yeah.
conservative, being raised, by these two generations before. Where you're coming into the
Yeah.
millennials who've everything's abundant. Oh my God, my button came off my shirt. I'll buy a new one. Everything's $3, $5. It's replaceable. It's a throwaway society. We've
Yeah.
got it now. All the Zeds seem to be going, wait a second, the planet's suffering. You guys were rat bags who ruined everything for us. We have to start going back to conservation. Otherwise, the alphas are going to be in trouble. Do you feel that
Yeah.
that's a set pattern? And, my parents were money doesn't grow on trees. I grew
Yeah.
up thinking we were quite poor when we were very, very working class. But my
Hmm.
parents told me, there was this scarcity. We will never get out. So, do you think those
Yeah.
intergenerational patterns are still around and alive and abundant?
I do. I do. And I 100% agree with you that the group that, I mean, I look at my grandparents' generation, they saved every container, every Cool Whip container, every, margarine container, everything. They had 75 containers in their cupboards when we cleaned out their house. And we were all laughing because my grandma would say, well, you never know when the neighbor's going to need leftovers, or you never know when I'm going to send something home with someone.
Oh,
My
bless.
dad's generation was very much, child. He basically was a professional in the 80s and 90s. And it was young, upwardly mobile professionals, and they were dual income, no kids for a while. And they heard scrimp and save, but the experience they were having was different. And I think they wanted to give, certainly my sister and I, everything they didn't get growing up. And then it perpetuates down the chain a little bit. To your point, Amanda, being a throwaway society, I remember my grandparents' wastebasket that they would set out for the garbage collector was tiny. It was 16 ounces. I mean, it was literally tiny, and they would have one little bag sitting in there. And today, our garbage bins could fit a family inside, and most of the time are completely full. And so I think the Zeds are 100% on point that we have to get back to conserving, and the mass consumerism has to go away at some point or lessen. My hope is that it happens, and I'm hopeful for my kids and my grandkids that they figure that out at some point, that it's not all throwaway.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I suppose the movements now back to tiny houses. I think there's a lady in Australia, My Tiny Garbage Can, where everything is reused, recycled, composted, so that her rubbish fits in
Yeah.
a tiny little bin. So there are these frugal movements about coming back to a simpler time and a simpler lifestyle. And I think
Yeah.
the 80s greed is good to the 90s overwhelm, and now everybody wakes up with stress and anxiety. It's not a life people want to be living anymore. And hopefully COVID to a
Right.
point helped us hit a bit of a reset button, but it feels like it's over
Yeah.
now. Let's go back to how we were, rather than,
Right.
oh, let's continue that. That was really nice to take that pause.
Yes.
Hope some of us can continue with the pause.
I do too. And candidly, it's part of my work and my mission with the message I'm setting out there is that you want to build a bigger life, not a bigger lifestyle. The big life is travel and time with friends and dinner with your relatives, and time to read and time to play guitar or piano or whatever your thing is. That's a bigger life for me. And the bigger lifestyle doesn't always create happiness. Sometimes it just creates more stress. And so again, the underlying message for my clients, our members and our shred community, is that we really want to help them minimize their expenses on a monthly basis, so they just have more free time, and they're more flexible, they're happy, they're content and peaceful, go on walks and don't worry about, I got to get back to my desk so I can make money and pay my bills.
Yeah.
um,
So investing
yeah,
more
it's
in
just a
experiences than things. It seems to be a common theme.
exactly.
Yeah. Can't take it with you. There you go. More cliches. Thank you so much for your time, Adam. I've loved chatting with you today. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Shred program? I will have the information in the show notes, but for people who just like a bit of an insight into that, can you share?
Yeah. It's a cash flow tool, and essentially what it does, Amanda, is it helps make people's income more efficient. And what I noticed being in the mortgage business for a period of time, was that our income isn't really very efficient. Our money gets deposited into a checking account, and it sits there, and it might sit there for days or weeks or months on end, slowly dripping out with ATM transactions and debit card transactions. Um, all the while we're paying interest on amortized loans like mortgages and car loans, student loans, et cetera. And so the shred method creates, through an algorithm, a way to use your cash flow in a more efficient manner, allowing you to blast away debt. So we can show people how to be completely free of debt, all of it, within 3 to 5, on the high end, 7 years. But again, if you do for 2 years what most people won't, you can do for the rest of your life what most people can't. And we
You've
show
said that
them,
once or
hey,
twice before, haven't you?
yeah, yeah, over and over. Because it's really amazing. Banks are making record profits and have for years and years and years. And when we start wondering, well, how do they make record profits? It must be us playing their game. What if we weren't playing their game? We were playing our game well. That's really what we're trying to do with the shred method.
Beautiful. Excellent. I'll definitely have the links to that, Adam. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.